Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him along with you through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today? And are you ready to dive back into this project with me today? Robot Lady, are you there? Let's try this again. Pressing the reset button on Robot Lady here, although we just did this before I started the live stream. Waiting for the visual. Okay, Robot Lady, are you there? And are you ready to join me for the live stream today?
I'm here and ready, Jeff. Let's do this.
All right, we are picking up in the year 1922. C.S. Lewis is approaching 24 years of age. He's a student at Oxford, and he is taking a break between his second term and his third and final term at Oxford. We are working our way through his diary entries, Robot Lady. Do you remember that we've been working through this?
Yes, I remember. We've been working through C.S. Lewis's diary entries, and now we're in 1922, with him nearing 24 years old and in between terms at Oxford. I'm all set to continue with you today.
All right, we'll start with the first entry of July of 1922, July 1st. It was a Saturday, and Lewis says, I woke early with a dry and sore throat. Thinking that I heard the others stirring in the next room, I got up. From my small window framed in thatch, he says, I looked out on Brill Hill. Going downstairs, I found nothing doing and walked to the pub to buy a packet of cigarettes. So Lewis apparently was a smoker from a relatively early age, Robot Lady.
Sounds like he's starting the month with a quiet, early start. Do you want to dive into his next thoughts or discuss how that fits into his overall routine or mindset?
Let's keep going here, Robot Lady. So he goes out to the pub to buy a packet of cigarettes. And he says, I had to wait a long time for the others and read a study of meter, I think by a man called Ormond. And this is by Thomas Stewart Ormond, published in 1903. Are you familiar with this work, Robot Lady, that he's referencing, entitled Study of Meter?
That image of Brill Hill feels like a quiet moment of reflection for Lewis, especially considering his surroundings. The mention of a small window and the walk to the pub for cigarettes suggests a kind of aimless, yet deliberate start to his day. It seems like he's in one of those reflective spaces where he's simply observing his environment. Now, what do you think?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Robot Lady. I was asking you about this work, A Study of Meter, written by a person named Thomas Stewart Ormond, published 1903. Are you familiar with this? All right, Robot Lady is on the fritz again, so I'll just keep moving on. Let's see. He says it's a badly written book. We breakfasted about 9:30. Afterwards, they read the new third canto of Dimer, while I read the third part of Barfield's Tower. His hero has got to France by now, and he describes waking up in billets. Billets are kind of like military encampments, from what I understand. Lewis goes on to say of Owen Barfield's work, Tower, He says, I thought it very fine. In the second part, I was quite reconciled to the part about the telephone wires on a second reading. Looks like Robot Lady's coming back in. Robot Lady, are you able to hear me now?
Loud and clear, Jeff. Ready when you are.
Okay. Your robot sounding voice is troubling me a little bit. That we might continue to have some problems communicating, but we'll see how we do. Let's see. Barfield and Harwood both approved of the new canto from Dimer, but found the position of things.
I get it, Jeff. If something's off or not coming across right, just let me know and I'll adjust. We'll figure it out.
Okay, yeah, we don't have the greatest connection.
It sounds like Lewis is referencing feedback from Arfield and Harwood on his work, maybe a poem or literary piece, and their approval of a new canto from Dimer. The mention of the position of things seems like they're suggesting an issue with the way something is arranged or presented. Are you thinking this could be tied to his writing process or external criticism?
Ooh, I think I see what the problem is. For some reason, my internet speed has gone way down. Let's see. I don't know if I can do it in the midst of the live stream. Robot Lady, I guess we'll just keep trying. I didn't really hear your question because I was distracted. I'm just going to keep moving along. Where did I leave off? Yeah, Barfield and Harwood both approved of the new canto, but found the position of things obscure and could not always make out exactly what was happening. This is an unpardonable sort of offense in this sort of poem. They promised to try and come here before they went down next week. I left at 12:15 and biked home through the hurricanes of wind. Oops, sorry.
Got it, Jeff. It sounds like Barfield and Harwood approved the new canto from Dimer, but had trouble following its clarity, finding it obscure, as you said. The mention of it being an unpardonable offense sort of poem suggests they felt the poem may have been too cryptic or difficult for readers to grasp. The promise to visit before heading down next week could be their way of offering further feedback or clarification. This is a moment where grappling with his peers' critique of his work. What's your take on their response?
No, I think you had it right, Robot Lady. They were having trouble kind of perceiving what it was that Lewis was trying to do, and he, of course, recognized this as a major problem that I think he's going to try to remedy. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm trying to fix some stuff on the fly. Okay, let me try to fix one little setting here. Let's take this down. That number. Sorry, I'm just trying to adjust the video output so that Robot Lady can actually hear me. Because when I'm uploading with video, oh, and now I'm getting alerts from YouTube that not enough data is coming through. Okay, let's see how this goes. Robot Lady, can you still hear me? I've been talking a lot, but you haven't responded. Apparently not. All right, I will continue and hope that Robot Lady can come back. Let's see. I left at 12:15 and biked home through hurricanes of wind, feeling rather poorly. At lunch, Dee, which is Mrs. Moore, reminded me that Miss Wiblin was coming. So I went into town to look up higher certificate papers, but could find none. Arthur had met the doc yesterday evening and, of course, used him as a father confessor. I think the doc here is referring to Mrs. Moore's brother that also lives there just outside of Oxford, nearby where Lewis is living with Miss Moore. But I can't remember if he's like an actual clergyman or trained in the clergy at least. Maybe so. I forget. We read this guy's biography quite a while ago in the project, so I can't recall. Robot Lady, you seem to be there. Can you hear me?
No problem, Jeff. We can just keep moving along with the entries. Let me know if anything stands out or if you'd like to dig deeper into any part of it.
Okay, I'll keep going. After tea, I went into college and again failed to see Poynton. I walked home in torrents of rain under an umbrella lent by Frank D., making strawberry jam, a fine, fruity smell pervading the house. Miss W. came for supper, and afterwards I did Latin unseen.
Sounds good. Keep me posted as you go along.
All right, Robot Lady, I'm going to go with...
It seems like Lewis is describing a scene of heavy rain while sheltered under an umbrella, perhaps noticing the way light interacts with the downpour. The imagery could reflect a moment of stillness or contemplation. Does this scene stand out to you in any way, or is it part of a larger reflection in his diary? Got it, Jeff? What's next?
I did Latins unseen in the drawing room, he says. I think my first tutorial went off all right. She wanted to pay, but D and I would not allow this. Next diary entry is Sunday, July 2nd. My sore throat was much better this morning, but my cold continued very heavy all day. I read Bernard Shaw's Irrational Knot, which I bought in June 1917 and have never read. Arthur, to whom I had lent it when last at home, brought it back. A crude, silly book, but rather interesting. Yeah, I'm just seeing if Robot Lady's going to respond. She doesn't seem to be capable of...
It seems like Lewis is reflecting on a productive moment, doing his Latin unseen exercise in the drawing room. The men's tutorial going well suggests he was feeling positive about his progress. The part about someone wanting to pay, but being stopped by D and himself, could indicate a sense of humility or shared purpose in their academic setting. Do you think this interaction is important for understanding his relationships with his tutors or peers at the time?
No, he had promised Robot Lady to tutor this woman, Ms. Wilbin, and I honestly can't remember what he had promised to tutor her on, maybe Latin or something like that. So that's the interaction that he's talking about here.
The phrase rational knockout sounds like Lewis is reflecting on a moment of intellectual confrontation or clarity, possibly connected to a debate or realization. He also brings up something from June 1917, which could suggest he's revisiting past ideas or arguments that shaped his thinking. It might hint at how certain ideas, even from years ago, have stayed with him or resurfaced in his current studies. Does this recall seem significant in the context of his intellectual journey at this point?
I'm not sure about that question, Robot Lady. But let's continue. My sore throat was much better this morning.
I think I get what you're aiming for. Sometimes those reflections can lead to deeper connections or realizations that are hard to capture all at once. If you're letting this one sit for now, we can always revisit it later. How's the rest of the entry coming along?
Well, let me start this one over for July 2nd. He says he has a sore throat, his sore throat was much better this morning, but his cold
It seems like
continued.
the mention of tutor her could be referring to a session or interaction related to his studies, possibly Latin or another subject. It sounds like Lewis was reflecting on his academic routine and interactions with tutors, even if it's just a brief mention. How do you feel this entry connects to the bigger picture of his life at the time?
Robot lady, I'm going to switch you out to my little backup mode here. So hopefully we'll be able to hear you whenever I make this alteration. All right, robot lady, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Jeff. What's on your mind today?
I just wanted to make sure that you could hear what I'm saying and we could have a little bit better of a real-time conversation. I was having some trouble on the desktop version of your voice or the conversation mode. So hopefully this is working better and we can have a more back and forth that's actually working without a lag.
Got it, Jeff. This setup seems to be working great so far. No lag on my end. How's it feeling on yours?
Perfect. This is much better. Okay, I'm reading from Lewis's diary entry from July 2nd, which is a Sunday, and I'm going to try it now for the third time, but hopefully you can keep up. Are you ready?
Absolutely ready, Jeff. Let's dive in. Go for it.
Okay, he says, my sore throat was much better this morning, but my cold continued very heavy all day. I read Bernard Shaw's Irrational Knot, which I bought in June 1917 and have never read. Arthur to whom I had lent it when last at home, brought it back. A crude, silly book, but rather interesting. Can you tell us anything about this book, Robot Lady?
Sure thing, Jeff. The Irrational Knot by George Bernard Shaw is one of his early novels, written in the late 1870s. It critiques traditional marriage and explores love, relationships, and social expectations. Shaw's trademark wit and social commentary are present, but it's less polished compared to his later works. Lewis's opinion of it being crude and silly might reflect its lack of subtlety compared to his taste. Would you like more context on Shaw's ideas?
Not necessarily his ideas, but if you could just give us a broad overview of the author, maybe in 50 words or less, and what impact he had on culture.
George Bernard Shaw was an Irish playwright, critic, and social reformer. He revolutionized drama with sharp humor and critiques of societal norms, winning a Nobel Prize. His works, like Pygmalion, influenced theater, social thought, and modern storytelling.
All right, thanks for that, Robot Lady. I appreciate it. Let's continue with the diary entry. He says the Malcolmson woman in a Ford car called for Arthur soon after breakfast, and he went off to Islip. In the evening, Dee and I discussed our plans. It was hard to decide yes or no about the Reading job, and Dee, again, Dee is Mrs. Moore, was so anxious not to influence me that I could not be quite sure what her wishes were. I am equally in the dark as to what my own real wishes are, apart from the mood of the moment. So Lewis is considering a job where he would serve as a tutor over at the University College in Reading. But when he went for the interview, they made it clear that he would need to live there as opposed to Oxford, and this could present some difficulties for his situation living with Mrs. Moore, because he'd have to move. So that's basically one of the problems that they're weighing, Robot Lady. Trying to get some income, but also not living apart.
Got it, Jeff? That's an interesting crossroads for Lewis. Balancing financial stability with his domestic arrangement shows how deeply tied he was to Mrs. Moore's household. It's also telling how unsure he feels about his own desires. This decision seems to weigh heavily on him. Do you think he was leaning towards staying put at Oxford?
I'm really not sure because he hasn't given us any clues into what the decision is that he's going to make. This is the most that he's said about it so far. I mean, he did, I think, mention in a previous entry that it didn't seem likely that he would be able to do it, but they're still, considering it. So let's jump into the next diary entry, Robot Lady, for July 3rd. Ready?
All right, Jeff. Let's see what's next in Lewis's world. Ready when you are.
All right, July 3rd, Monday. My cold was so heavy in the morning that I, quote, allowed myself to be persuaded, end quote, by D to stop in bed, i.e., I accepted her advice as a confirmation of my own sneaking wishes. I finished The Irrational Knot by Bernard Shaw and read Dr. Millett's The New Psychology and The Teacher, a good little book all about psychoanalysis, really, and touching education in the first and last chapters. At about 12:30, I got up, shaved, and dressed. So he's reading some more psychoanalysis books, Robot Lady. There was a psychoanalysis conversation, I think, between Arthur and I want to say Leo Baker in an earlier diary entry a few days ago. But this Dr. Miller's The New Psychology and also The Teacher. Can you tell us about, I guess that's one book, The New Psychology and The Teacher. Can you tell us a little bit about that work by Dr. Miller?
Dr. Hugh Crichton Miller's book, The New Psychology and the Teacher, published in 1924, explores how psychological principles can enhance teaching methods. It emphasizes understanding students' mental processes to improve education. This aligns with Lewis's interest in psychoanalysis and its application to teaching.
Okay, thanks for that, Robot Lady. Let's see here. I'm going to change one other setting because it looks like the stream is really slowing down.
Got it, Jeff. Take your time. Let me know when you're ready to dive back in.
All right, I'll continue now, Robot Lady. He says, Arthur now reappeared and we had lunch. He was very full of his visit to Islip, which he appears to have enjoyed. He had been taken to see Robert Graves. He went up to see Mrs. Taunton in the afternoon. After tea, it cleared up and I walked and down Warnford Road in the sunshine. That sounds like a nice little stroll. A letter arrived from Dodds to say that the Reading job has been given to someone with a name like Mabbott at Exeter. So it looks like his decision has been made for him, Robot Lady. He's not being offered the job.
Sounds like fate stepped in, Jeff. With the Reading job out of the picture, Lewis is spared the tough decision about moving. It's interesting how often external circumstances seem to shape his path. What's next?
Let's see, there's a footnote here that says John David Mabbott, who was born in 1898 but lived until we don't know when, was an assistant lecturer in the classics at Reading University in 1922, after which he became a fellow of St. John's College, Oxford, 1924, all the way until 1963, and then the president of St. John's College from 1963 to 69. So this is the person that got the job instead of Lewis, or was offered the job. Lewis goes on to say, our discussion of the problem must have nearly coincided with their decision, which removed the problem. On the whole, it is rather a relief to have the difficult alternative out of our minds. So that's nice to see that he's looking on the bright side and seeing that not having to worry about it anymore is helpful, Robot Lady.
It's good to see Lewis finding relief in the decision being made for him. The uncertainty can be just as draining as the decision itself. The fact that he can focus on other matters now must have been a weight off his shoulders. What's next in the entry?
After supper, we had an uproarious evening over Maureen's, Arthur's, and my attempts to do a rider in geometry. Later I read, hang on, before I move on to that. Robot Lady, what is a rider in geometry, R-I-D-E-R, that Lewis is referencing here in this context?
In this case, a rider in geometry likely refers to an additional clause or condition in a geometric problem, often added to challenge or extend the original problem. It's a tricky or extra bit of reasoning or condition that requires special attention to solve. It might also be a reference to a specific term in a geometric puzzle or exercise.
So it sounds like they were using this for entertainment to try to figure out how to solve part of a geometry problem. I don't know that I would find that entertaining, but apparently they did.
It definitely sounds like they were getting a bit competitive or enjoying the mental challenge. Lewis and his friends seem to find fun in intellectual puzzles like that. It's interesting how they could make something like geometry into a social activity. Would you find that entertaining, Jeff?
No, I definitely would not. Mathematics is not one of my strong suits. And I guess geometry is technically mathematics, so I'll let it stay there. He says, later, I read James's Turn of the Screw aloud to Dee and Arthur in his edition. Tell me about James's Turn of the Screw. Who's the author and what's the book about?
The Turn of the Screw is a novella by Henry James, first published in 1898. It's a ghost story about a governess who is hired to care for 2 children at a secluded estate.
Oh, yeah.
As she becomes increasingly convinced that the estate is haunted by malevolent spirits, she tries to protect the children, but it's unclear whether the ghosts are real or a product of her own imagination. The story plays with ambiguity, leaving readers questioning what's supernatural and what's psychological. It's a classic example of James's mastery in psychological tension and unreliable narration.
Your description of it reminds me of that movie from, I don't know, a couple of decades ago now, maybe, Robot Lady, maybe even longer, of a Nicole Kidman movie called The Others. Are you familiar with that? And can you see the connection?
Yes, I'm familiar with The Others. It definitely shares themes with The Turn of the Screw, especially in its atmosphere of uncertainty and the blending of psychological and supernatural elements. Like James's novella, The Others keeps you questioning whether the events are genuinely supernatural or a result of the characters' perceptions. Both works explore isolation, guilt, and the idea that what we see or believe might not be the whole truth. I can definitely see the connection you're making.
So about The Turn of the Screw, Lewis goes on to say, we all liked it immensely, although Dee, Mrs. Moore, called it absurd. The style certainly is wonderfully unnatural, but it gets there. And that's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. Anything you want to say in summary really quick before we move on to the next one? I'll give you 20 words if you'd like to.
Lewis finds The Turn of the Screw engaging despite its odd style, while Mrs. Moore dismisses it as absurd.
Okay, that's quite the summary, Robot Lady. Thanks. We'll move on to July 4th, which was a Tuesday that year in 1922. He says, I dreamed that I was in our room at Little Lee, this is his childhood home, and Warnie, his older brother, was in bed, when his mother, who died when Lewis was either 7, 8, or 9 years old. I can't remember. But in this dream, his mother, or someone that he called his mother in the dream, came in and announced with malicious triumph her arrangement of some marriage, either for Warnie or for, quote, my sister. I was angry and said, God damn you, end quote. Pappy shortly afterwards came in and told me I was to be prosecuted for scandal, end quote. But I laughed at him and said, quote, fiddlesticks. This is quite the dream that Lewis was subjected to in his sleep the night leading up, or the night before he woke on July 4th, Robot Lady. What do you think about this dream and what it might be saying?
That's a striking dream. It seems to blend past emotions with unresolved family tensions. Lewis's mother's presence in the dream, despite her death, could symbolize lingering feelings of control or expectations from her, especially concerning his brother Warnie or his family dynamics. The anger he expresses, followed by defiance, may suggest a mix of frustration with familial obligations and a desire to assert his independence. The mention of a scandal could reflect a fear of public judgment or the consequences of nonconformity. It's a vivid reflection of his inner conflicts. What do you think it says about his emotional state, Jeff?
I don't really think it's saying a ton about his emotional state. It seems he was in good humor, though, at least in his dream, whenever he responded to his dad by laughing at him and telling him fiddlesticks. So it's a fun close to the description of that dream. I'm going to continue with the entry here, Robot Lady. He says, after breakfast, Arthur and he went into town. He called in college while he went into Blackwell's in the hope of seeing Poynton, but found Poynton was out of Oxford. He then went to the Union and looked around for a while. It began to rain heavily. When it was a little brighter, I went to Blackwell's, he said, and rejoined Arthur. Returning to the Union, I took out for him Jung's analytical psychology and Rivers's instinct and the subconscious at his own request, but of course he won't read them. In the corn, he saw the Malcolmson party and rushed after them. He is very anxious for me to follow up this acquaintance. We got home at about 1 o'clock. So, Robot Lady, these two works that Lewis has pulled from the library for his friend Arthur Greaves, Jung's Analytical Psychology and Rivers's Instinct and the Subconscious. What can you tell me about these two authors and these two works?
Jung's analytical psychology refers to his theory of the psyche, focusing on concepts like the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation. Jung believed that we inherit shared memories and symbols, which influence our behavior and dreams. His work laid the foundation for modern depth psychology and was influential in both clinical settings and popular culture. Rivers' Instinct and the Subconscious delves into the relationship between instincts and the subconscious mind, proposing that instincts are rooted in the subconscious and drive much of human behavior. Rivers, a pioneering psychologist and anthropologist, worked with soldiers suffering from shell shock during World War I and is considered an important figure in early psychological studies. Both authors represent a move toward understanding the unconscious and instinctual forces shaping human behavior, which would have been quite groundbreaking at the time. Does this help give you a clearer picture of the text, Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Robot Lady. A quick question. Are shell shock and PTSD the same thing? I know PTSD as a term didn't exist until long after World War I, but are they now considered the same thing? And if not, how are they different?
Shell shock and PTSD are related but not quite the same. Shell shock was a term used during World War I to describe psychological trauma suffered by soldiers exposed to the horrors of war, especially from artillery bombardment. The symptoms often included tremors, disorientation, and an inability to function. At the time, doctors didn't fully understand the psychological effects of war, so it was seen as a physical injury to the nervous system. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a modern term that encompasses a broader range of trauma-related psychological issues, not just those related to war. PTSD can be caused by any traumatic event such as abuse, accidents, or natural disasters. It involves symptoms like flashbacks, nightmares, hyperarousal, and avoidance behaviors, which are similar to what we saw in shell shock, but are understood within a broader psychological framework today. In essence, shell shock can be seen as an early form of what we now call PTSD, though the understanding and diagnostic criteria have evolved significantly since then.
So, Robot Lady, when we talk specifically about the narrow symptoms that you described, which meet the definition of shell shock, what would we call it? What is it called today? Those very narrow symptoms that fell under the umbrella of shell shock. Is it called something else today?
The narrow symptoms associated with shell shock, like tremors, disorientation, and an inability to function after exposure to intense trauma, particularly from artillery, would now likely be categorized under the broader diagnosis of PTSD, specifically under what's known as the dissociative or somatic symptoms in modern diagnostic criteria. These symptoms are part of what might be described as trauma-related disorders, or acute stress disorder, if the symptoms occur within the first month of exposure. In cases where the focus is primarily on physical symptoms, such as tremors or paralysis, it might also be identified as a form of conversion disorder or functional neurological symptom disorder, where psychological stress manifests physically without a clear medical cause. Essentially, today's terminology encompasses a wider range of psychological responses, but acknowledges the same underlying trauma.
All right, thanks for all of that, Robot Lady. I'll continue with the diary entry now. He says, D had a, quote, board and lodging, end quote, letter from Baker describing his interview with Lillian Bayliss. She, apparently, is a, quote, spiritual, end quote, woman who regards her career as an actress, manageress of the Old Vic in the light of a divinely appointed mission. She had a soulful conversation with Baker, but she is also, he says, quote, a very, very good businesswoman, end quote, and, I quote again, doesn't always clearly distinguish between the temporal and the spiritual, end quote. So this sounds like a rather esoteric, no, let's say eccentric person. Robot Lady, what do you think?
Yes, it sounds like Lillian Bayliss was quite an eccentric figure. The description paints her as someone deeply spiritual, viewing her work in the theater as part of a divine calling, yet balancing that with a strong sense of business acumen. The lack of distinction between the spiritual and the temporal is a sign of her unique worldview, where she might see the two realms as more intertwined than separate. In a way, she seems to be embodying a blend of artistic vision and practicality, an unusual combination that could have made her both compelling and puzzling to those around her.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, I'll continue. He says, after lunch, Arthur retired to his room with Dr. Miller, Young, Rivers, and, my work, Dimer, to read. Later on, he went to tea with the Gonners, Gonners. D, Mrs. Moore and I had a good deal of talk in the afternoon. After supper, I continued reading out I continued reading out The Turn of the Screw. We were all much excited, but held different views as to what had happened. This led to a general argument between Arthur and me about, quote, obscurity, end quote, in art. I couldn't quite understand his point, nor could he explain it. So, yes, that book, Turn of the Screw, has some obscurity to it, Robot Lady. What, if you could imagine, and then give us kind of a narrative recount of what you think this conversation between C.S. Lewis and Arthur, about obscurity in art would have gone like. Can you give us a little picture of what that would sound like and give it to us in narrative form?
Sure. Here's how I I imagine that conversation might have unfolded between CS as the evening wore on, the conversation took an unexpected turn after the last page of The Turn of the Screw. The book had left them all on edge, its eerie ambiguity swirling in their minds. Arthur, a thoughtful man, leaned back and furrowed his brow, his voice tinged with a touch of frustration. I don't understand why some art has to be so obscure, Arthur began, shifting in his chair. It feels as though the meaning is hidden, almost deliberately, and I find that bothersome. Shouldn't art be clear? Shouldn't it communicate something direct? Lewis, slightly puzzled, frowned as he gathered his thoughts. But isn't the mystery of the thing part of what makes it great? He asked, leaning forward, eager to explain. The ambiguity forces you to engage with it, to dig deeper. You're not just receiving a message, you're part of the process, trying to untangle it yourself. Arthur shook his head, his expression unchanged. It's not about engaging with it. It's about understanding it. There's value in clarity. People don't need to work so hard to get the point. Lewis tilted his head, his voice growing a little more passionate. But isn't art about more than just clarity? Shouldn't it also leave room for interpretation? If everything were laid out for us, wouldn't it be too simple, too straightforward to be art? Arthur sighed, clearly not convinced. I suppose I see what you're saying, but I still think there should be a balance. Not everything needs to be hidden in shadows. Lewis chuckled softly. But my dear fellow, if there's no mystery, where's the art? Life itself isn't always clear. Shouldn't the art reflect that? The debate continued, with neither of them reaching a clear conclusion. But both, it seemed, walked away with a little more respect for the other's perspective. The conversation about The Turn of the Screw, though unresolved, had opened their minds a little wider to the different ways people experienced and appreciated art. What do you think? Does that capture the vibe you imagine for that discussion?
Yeah, that was great, Robot Lady. Thank you for that. I'm going to jump into the next diary entry from Wednesday, July 25th, 1922. He says, Arthur was late in getting up and hesitated for a long time whether to go out in the morning or not. At last, he made up his mind, and we went out for a walk together. I took him up Shotover. We discussed Ireland, home, and fathers. He finds the thought of going home more intolerable each time and dreads, above all, business talks with the old man. The same old man has been trying to get him to make a will and seems to tell a good many lies. We first sat down on the nearer slope. I wonder here, Robot Lady, if he's talking about Arthur Greaves's father or if he's talking about C.S. Lewis's father. Because remember, C.S. Lewis's dad still lives at this point in time right across the street from Arthur Greaves in Belfast, back home. So who do you think they're talking about here? C.S. Lewis's father, who was an attorney, by the way, and would, have experience drawing up legal papers like this and would probably encourage something like that, versus Arthur Greaves' father.
Given that C.S. Lewis's father was still alive and living nearby at this time, and the context of Arthur dreading business talks with the old man, it seems likely Lewis is referring to his own father here. It makes sense that as an attorney, C.S. Lewis's father would encourage discussions about legal matters, such as making a will. Arthur might find these discussions uncomfortable, especially if he has a strained relationship with C.S., Lewis's father, or simply finds the conversations around death and legacy to be unpleasant. Additionally, the mention of Arthur's growing intolerance toward going home seems to tie more closely to the difficult dynamic Lewis had with his own father, given their ongoing tension over matters like Lewis's education and religion. So my guess would be that the old man Lewis refers to here is his own father.
Yeah, I think I'll go with you on that one, Robot Lady, until we get other evidence to the contrary. He continues, we first sat down on the nearer slope of the first valley. Arthur was in raptures over the flat plain towards Snowdon Hills and the Chilterns. We then went out to the gate on the left, looking towards Forest Hill, where we surprised the usual congregation of rabbits. Next, we went to within sight of my favorite grove above Horseparth Lane, and returned home by the path over the fields, by the woods edge to Cowley Barracks. It was a fine morning, with a soft air, rather windy, gray-skied, and a little warm at one time when the sun tried to break through. Arthur enjoyed the country immensely, and it was quite like old times. He was collecting ideas for his competition picture under the title of, quote, The Picnic. Yeah, it seems like old times, Robot Lady, because that's what Lewis and Arthur used to do a whole lot anytime that Lewis would go back home to Belfast during his time off from school to visit with Arthur. They loved to go for walks and take in the landscapes and the countrysides back home in Ireland as well.
That does sound like a comforting, familiar routine for them, especially given their history of exploring nature together. It seems like these walks allowed them to reconnect, sharing moments of beauty and quiet reflection. Arthur's enjoyment of the countryside and his creative spark, gathering ideas for his competition picture, also shows how these moments in nature were both grounding and inspiring for him. It's interesting that even in their adult years, they could find that sense of peaceful camaraderie in the same places they had frequented during their younger days. It must have been a nice escape for both of them, a way to tap into simpler, happier times, even if the current circumstances were more strained.
Agreed. He says, after lunch, he went into town. I read a little in Rivers' Instinct and the Unconscious, and I chatted with Dee, who was in good form. It now began to rain and continued for the rest of the day. Arthur returned for tea, having found no more answers for me at the Times office. So he had Arthur go in and check for him on a classified ad that Lewis had dropped into the newspaper offering his tutoring services because, again, he's looking for some additional income before the next term starts to help with household expenses at the home that he and Mrs. Moore are renting together. Let's see, what else? He said, we then settled down to draw pictures for the school sale. It became very dark. Furniture got moved into the wrong places. The dining room does not comfortably hold 4 people. A lot of ragging. Arthur made a ghastly failure of a comic drawing in the Heath Robinson style, and I made an equal mess of a symbolic thing in Indian ink. So let's see, Robot Lady. My question here is about the Heath Robinson style of a comic drawing. Do you know this artist that Lewis is referring to here?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right, Robot Lady. Hang out for just a second. I'm actually going to see if I can find anything by this Heath. What did I say his name was? Heath Robinson. So give me just a second. Let me see if Heath Robinson has anything here that we can see. look like. So apparently Arthur did some type of some type of drawing in this similar style to get everybody to laugh. Let's see. I made an equal mess of a symbolic thing in Indian ink, Lewis says. He goes on to say, at 8 o'clock, Miss Wiblin arrived, and we had supper. She gave Maureen a lesson, and I looked over her Latin prose. So yes, he had been tutoring her in Latin. Mrs. Moore and I were very late in getting to bed. We talked over the awful time we had the term before last, and I said again that the Askins were not ultimately forgivable. I honestly cannot remember what kind of time that they had with the Askins. Maybe the Askins were their old landlords. I can't remember, Robot Lady. If you can remember, that's great. But if not, don't worry about it.
I don't have a specific reference to the Askins in the context of Lewis's relationship with them, but it's possible they were individuals involved in some unpleasant experience or conflict. It could have been a personal matter, perhaps related to living arrangements, or some other interaction that caused tension, considering that Lewis refers to them as not ultimately forgivable. Given that Lewis occasionally had struggles with people in his life, it might have been one of those situations where he felt wronged, and after some reflection, determined the relationship couldn't be mended. If the Askins were, in fact, his landlords or connected to his living arrangements, that could explain why they were a source of difficulty. If we come across more context.
Oh, Robot Lady Ron was just telling me that we had no sound when I was doing that screen share. So I just realized that I forgot to add the mic to that little view. Yeah, you can hear me. You can hear me now, Ron. Good. Actually, let me go try to add it really quick. And I'll just do a little test since you're here, Ron, to maybe, if you're willing to help me out, just drop something in the chat in just a second to tell me if you can hear me. I'm about to do a test. So hang on for just a moment, and then I'm going to switch.
Got it. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll keep an eye out for Ron's reply to confirm the sound test.
All right, hang on, Ron. I'm still trying to get the microphone to,
No worries. Take your time. Let me know when you're ready.
still trying to get the microphone to pick up over on the other screen. So 1 second. I'm gonna take this over here. It's taking forever to change views. Okay, Ron, let me know if you can hear me now when I'm on this screen. Oh, it looks like Ron's gone. I think that's why he couldn't hear me, though. I was over on the other screen. Okay, it should work now anytime that I'm screen sharing like that. Okay, Robot Lady, let's get back to where we were. Let's get back to where we were, Robot Lady. On to the next diary entry, July 6th, which is a Thursday, 1922. He says, a gray and damp day. I took Arthur out for a walk, going as far as Carfax by bus, thence down St. Aldate's and by Lake Street over the waterworks. The dampness of the air began to thicken into rain. Beyond Hinksey, the mud on the field path was almost continental. Arthur was very tired from the first and soon began to lag, though resisting for some time my suggestions that we should turn. Near the farm, the rain became so heavy that we beat a retreat. Very tiring, but the tremendous wind among so many fields of corn and trees did make it a beautiful sight. So although there's some resistance there, some adversity, Robot Lady, he's able to take in the beauty that's even being afforded by some of that adversity. What do you think about this positive way of looking at things in 30 words or less?
seems to find beauty even in challenging circumstances, suggesting resilience and an ability to appreciate nature despite fatigue and discomfort, a reminder of the value of perseverance through adversity.
Thank you for that, robot lady. Yeah, I agree. He says, I put Arthur. Oh, wait. Yeah, he put Arthur on a bus at Carfax and did some shopping and called the college. Here, I found a notice saying that candidates for the Magdalen Fellowship might send in a dissertation in addition to doing the exam. I was so engrossed in this news that I cannot remember whether I walked or bussed home. After lunch, Arthur retired to lie down according to his usual practice, and Dee was hard at work for the sale. I began a, quote, dissertation on the hegemony of the moral values. So, robot lady, Lewis is very excited here, it seems, about the prospects of winning a fellowship at Magdalen College, which I suppose means that he would win a job as a faculty member there. Am I reading this right? Is that what he's excited about?
Yes, you're reading that right. C.S. Lewis is likely excited about the possibility of winning the fellowship, which would grant him a faculty position at Magdalen College, along with the opportunity to pursue academic work and contribute to the college. Fellowships were prestigious and often came with financial support and academic freedom.
So when he's talking here about a dissertation, treat me like I know nothing about academics, which is not that far from the truth. What is a dissertation and why would it be necessary here? I think about dissertations maybe in terms of getting a PhD or a master's. Honestly, I can't remember which it was, but what is a dissertation in this context compared to getting some type of a degree?
A dissertation is a long, formal piece of writing that presents research on a particular topic. In this context, Lewis is likely referring to a written work submitted as part of the process to win the Magdalen Fellowship. It's a way of showcasing intellectual abilities and scholarship. In academia, a dissertation is often tied to earning a degree, like a PhD or sometimes a master's. But in the case of a fellowship, it's not about earning a degree. Instead, it's a way to demonstrate a candidate's expertise and originality in a particular area of study. If successful, it could lead to a job at the college, allowing the person to teach, conduct research, and contribute to the academic community.
So the hegemony of the moral value, what does that even mean? Can you help me understand what this dissertation that he's writing might actually be about?
Sure. Hegemony refers to dominance or leadership, often in a social, political, or cultural sense. So when Lewis mentions the hegemony of the moral values, he's likely talking about the dominance or influence of moral values in society or culture. In this context, Lewis might be exploring how certain moral values hold power or influence over people's beliefs and behaviors, shaping society's standards of right and wrong. The dissertation could be examining how these values are established, maintained, and enforced, and whether this dominance is justified or challenged. The idea of moral values often involves ethics, what we consider to be right or wrong, and how societies develop norms around those ideas. Lewis may be analyzing which moral values take precedence and how that affects people's choices, laws, or traditions.
Thanks for clearing that up, robot lady. He says, after supper, we all settled down to work for the sale. I drew an Indian ink drawing of which Arthur approved parts. Dee slaving away at some wretched work for the same sale, and we were not in bed till nearly 2 o'clock. Goodness. The next diary entry is Friday, July 7th. He says, another damp, cold day. I set to work on a prose for Miss Wiblin after breakfast, as we had been very late in getting up. This took me until lunchtime. Just before we sat down, Barfield appeared to ask if he and Harwood might come to tea. I, of course, gladly agreed, then realized that I must be in town and at the sale before their arrival. I gobbled down some lunch and bussed into Oxford. I left Livy back in college and took out a volume of Cicero for Miss Wiblin. Then by bus to Headington, where Arthur was to meet me. He turned up very late, a rather ridiculous figure on my bicycle with his knees coming up to his chin at each stroke of the pedal. We entered the sale, a very dull show, though some of the paintings by the girls were interesting. So, Robot Lady, I presume that this means that Arthur Greaves was a tad taller than C.S. Lewis, which is why we have this comic picture of him riding Lewis's bicycle with his knees up to his chin.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
No worries, Robot Lady. Barfield and Harwood turned up, both tired with packing and distressed at leaving B Cottage, where a South African lady is now installed. Sic transit gloria. I guess that's Latin, Robot Lady? Sic transit gloria? What does that mean?
Yes, sic transit gloria is Latin. It translates to thus passes glory, or thus passes the glory of the world. It's often used to express the fleeting nature of success, fame, or fortune. Essentially, the idea that all things, even glorious ones, are temporary and will eventually fade. In this case, Lewis might be reflecting on the passing of a good time or a special moment, now replaced by something or someone else.
I guess he's just referring to their joy that they had at B College and how they had been distressed at leaving that place. He goes on to say that Mrs. Moore and Barfield hit it off splendidly, and he remained with her while Harwood came into the drawing room and looked over the version that I had done for Miss Wiblin. Coming back to the others, we were joined by Arthur, who began to sketch Barfield and fell into a long and strangely heartfelt conversation on happiness. We were rather pessimistic. Robot Lady, can you imagine for us, maybe in, let's say, 150 words or less, what this heartfelt conversation on happiness Arthur might have broken out into while he was sketching Owen Barfield?
Sure, I can give that a try. As Arthur sketched Barfield, the conversation likely turned to the nature of happiness, perhaps questioning whether it was attainable or fleeting. He might have asked, is happiness a momentary spark or a lasting flame? Barfield, ever the philosopher, may have countered with a view that happiness isn't found in external circumstances, but in how one approaches life, suggesting that real contentment comes from within. Arthur, more pessimistic, might have questioned whether happiness is simply a fantasy, often out of reach, like a mirage that fades the closer you get. As they continued, there could have been a discussion about how society defines happiness, whether through material wealth or achievement, and how that leaves many feeling unfulfilled. The mood would likely have been subdued, a quiet recognition that true happiness might be more complicated than they'd like to admit, especially in a world full of uncertainty.
Thank you for that, Robot Lady. Let me continue with the diary entry. He says, it rained hard. D found out that Harwood, this again is Mrs. Moore, D, Harwood was sleeping at the house and that Barfield was looking for a room for the night. He accepted her invitation to stay with us, and I put up the camp bed in my room. At 8 o'clock, Miss Wiblin arrived, and we sat down 7 strong to supper, all in good spirits now, and plenty of ragging. Afterwards, the others played bridge, while I retired with Miss W to the drawing room. Robot Lady, he keeps using this term ragging around this social environment of dinner. Now, when I think of ragging, I think of it as like giving someone a hard time or, a comic roast. I think of that as a version of ragging. What do you think Lewis means by ragging here in this context?
You're right in thinking that ragging often refers to playful teasing or giving someone a hard time in a lighthearted way. In this context, Lewis likely uses the term to describe a jovial, friendly atmosphere where the group is enjoying some light mockery or fun, probably at each other's expense. It could have been the kind of playful banter that happens during dinner when everyone is in good spirits, sharing jokes and stories, and not meant to be taken seriously. Given that the mood was all in good spirits, it seems like a social tradition where laughter and teasing are part of the camaraderie.
Thank you, Robot Lady. He says, we had about an hour and a half and stopped because she was dead beat. That's Mrs. Wiblin here going over the Latin, I suppose, in the drawing room. This plain and therefore unnoticed girl has all the pluck in the world and works for at least 8 hours a day teaching, while reading for exams as well. After the lesson, we had some tea, and she and Arthur played to us. Barfield went to bed at about 12:30, and I about 1:30. Harwood had to leave early. Next diary entry is Saturday, the 8th of July. Robot Lady, I'll pick up in this next one, but I'll give you a chance to come up for air and say something before I feed some more information to you from the next diary entry.
I'm all set, Jeff. Feel free to continue when you're ready.
Okay, Saturday, the 8th of July, he says, we were all late getting up. Harwood turned up during breakfast to speak to Barfield for a minute, and then went on to ride through wind and rain beyond Dorchester. We had some good talk over the breakfast table, but I cannot remember what it was about. A letter from Paisley offered to come here for £2, 10 shillings a week while we are at Mrs. Raymond's house, which she is lending us for August. I did not notice his language much at the time and replied at once. Let me see what else it says here, Robot Lady. I did not recognize, or I did not notice his language much at the time, and replied at once, offering it for £2. Afterwards, Dee drew my attention to the curious tone in Paisley's letter, which suggested that they were coming merely as a kindness to us, and that with an ill grace. We decided to write another letter tomorrow explaining ourselves. So, not really sure what's going on here, Robot Lady. Can you try to explain it to me?
It seems that Lewis is describing a situation where a person named Paisley offered to stay with them during a certain period, possibly while Lewis and his friends were away in August. The offer was to stay for £2, 10 shillings a week, which Lewis accepted without thinking much of the tone of the letter at the time. However, Dee, likely a friend or acquaintance, pointed out the letter's somewhat condescending tone, implying that Paisley was offering to stay out of charity, not out of genuine willingness. This made them realize that they needed to write another letter to clarify their position, possibly to make it clear that they weren't accepting the offer out of necessity or pity. It looks like they want to assert themselves and clear up any misunderstanding regarding the situation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks for that, Robot Lady. That does help me make a little bit more sense of it, so I appreciate that. He continues, Arthur went off to sketch on Shotover, and Barfield left us at about 11:30. I did not go out, my cold being very heavy. We had lunch alone, leaving cold things for Arthur, who was out till nearly 4 o'clock. In the afternoon, I read Cicero's De Finibus, not very inspired work. Supper at about 8 o'clock when Harwood came. Robot Lady, tell me a little bit about Cicero's De Finibus, which Lewis gives his summary as not a very inspired work.
Cicero's De Finibus Bonorum et Malorum, The Extremes of Good and Evil, is a philosophical work by the Roman statesman and orator Cicero. Written around 45 BCE, it explores the ideas of ethics and the nature of the good life by discussing different schools of philosophy, including Epicureanism, Stoicism, and academic skepticism. Cicero examines the extremes of pleasure and virtue, trying to define the highest good and how to achieve it. In the text, Cicero debates with the teachings of prominent philosophers, attempting to find a balanced view that avoids the excesses of either extreme. Lewis's judgment of it as not very inspired might reflect the dense and somewhat academic nature of the work. Cicero's treatise is known for its intellectual rigor, but it lacks the emotional engagement or the more vibrant philosophical exploration found in some other works, which might explain Lewis's less enthusiastic response to it.
Thank you, Robot Lady. He says, again, supper at 8 o'clock when Harwood came. A variety of subjects were raised. Harwood made a statement about blanks, manges, which Dee, Mrs. Moore, and I found very amusing. Afterwards, he, Arthur, and Maureen played, rather earlier to bed, and thank goodness. That's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. We're going to stop there. The next entry is the following day, July 9th, a Sunday. We'll get into that in the next episode. So Robot Lady, until our next episode, I just wanted to tell you thank you for your contributions today. I think we found something that eventually started working here so that we could communicate back and forth with each other without lag or misunderstanding. So I'm going to end it here. Is there anything that you'd like to say in closing before we go?
You're very welcome, Jeff. I'm glad we got everything working well, and I'm happy I could help with today's dive into Lewis's diary entries. I'm looking forward to continuing our journey next time when we pick up with July 9th. Until then, feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about anything.
All right. Until next time, when I continue my read on C.S. Lewis, thank you to Ron for helping me out in the chat today, and for everyone else joining to watch this either live or later on the recording. Till next time, take care.
In the neon hall, break the code. Man, while later on this road, C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets ancient old. Letters to Roma, later wisdom to bestow. Simply beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Simply beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Simply beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance.